Hello everyone, I wish you a wonderful day. In the middle of the heavy rain, Toan's hand slips while cutting bamboo. The cut is bleeding, yet he keeps working to finish the trellis before Tu Diem returns home. What makes him refuse to stop even when his body is completely exhausted? Now let's discover the story of Toan and Tu Diem. Will these difficult rainy days bring them closer together or test them even more? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next ones. The hill path is wet with mist and more slippery than on previous days. The early light is still weak, so the thin moss on the rocks is hard to see. Toan slows down half a step to keep a safe distance for Tu Diem. At one section, she slips slightly, her body tilting to one side. He reaches his hand out very fast, but only keeps it close without touching, ready to catch her if she falls. They do not fully stop, they only adjust their breathing. You can clearly see that his focus is on watching the ground and reacting to every change. He asks if she is tired. She shakes her head. Her breathing is deeper and heavier than at the beginning, but her eyes are still bright. This is the longest run she has ever tried. Her heart is beating fast, her calves are tight, her shoulders are getting heavy, but she does not want to turn back halfway. When they reach the higher point, the wind blows through her sweat-wet shirt, and her back turns cold. Toan shifts to the side, facing the wind to block it for her. Only a small movement, but enough for her to stand still for a few seconds and regain her rhythm. They look down into the valley. The mist is thicker. Rooftops appear and disappear. Kitchen smoke rises slowly because the air is heavy. This moment is not simply about looking at the view. It is when the body is tired, but the mind becomes very clear. Tu Diem says she has never seen a morning like this. Toan does not answer with a long sentence. He only tells her they should rest a little more and then go down because the path is getting wetter. The way down is more difficult than the way up. Water from above runs across the trail. Toan steps down first, testing the grip with his full foot before signaling her to follow. When crossing the most slippery spot, he stands one step lower, so if she slips, there will be support right in front of her. When they arrive home, her hands are cold and slightly shaking. He opens the door and tells her to wash her hands with warm water before changing into slippers. The dry firewood burns slower today because the air is humid. He bends down and blows longer than usual. Smoke blows back into his face and makes his eyes sting, but he keeps a steady rhythm until the fire rises. Only then does he stand up. While preparing breakfast, the pot of water boils strongly. Because the fire is big, Tu Diem lifts it down a little too quickly and hot water splashes onto the back of her hand. She pulls back by reflex. Toan turns immediately, does not ask much, opens the tap and lets cool water run over the red skin until the heat fades. Only after that does he return to what he was doing. He goes out to water the flowers. The strong wind makes the clothesline hit the post with a dry sound. One flower pot tilts because the soil underneath has softened from last night's rain. He holds it in time and presses the soil tight again. He looks at the sky for a long time, calculating how much time is left before the rain comes. Inside the kitchen, Tu Diem looks outside. For the first time, she realizes that a morning that seems peaceful always contains things that must be handled immediately. The bowl of instant noodles is placed on the table when the sky begins to darken. They eat faster than usual. Toan squeezes lime but stops halfway when the metal roof makes a loud sound. He stands up to check the ropes on the awning and only then sits down again. They do not talk about it, but both know the weather is changing. After eating, he washes the bowls right away and tells her to go harvesting early to avoid the rain. The division of work is clear and needs no discussion. The road to the market has wind blowing across, and dust moving low. The vegetables are still wet with dew, so the load on her shoulder is heavier than usual. When she arrives, there are fewer customers. Everyone is looking at the sky. Someone offers a lower price because they are afraid that when the rain comes, the goods cannot be sold. She stands still for a few seconds and still nods to sell. The money goes into her hand, but it is less than expected. Light rain begins. She quickly pulls the sheet to cover the basket, but one bundle of vegetables is already wet and has to be sold cheaper. Rainwater runs down her back and she slowly gets cold. When she finishes selling and the market becomes empty, she suddenly remembers that she forgot to keep some vegetables for Toan and forgot to buy the watering can. The feeling of regret is clear, but there is no time to go back. The way home feels longer because the rain gets heavier. Mud sticks to her sandals. The basket is empty, but her shoulder still aches from the long distance. In her mind, she only thinks about the garden and the person working there. In the garden, Toan is cutting bamboo. Wet bamboo is slippery. The blade shifts once and cuts across his hand. Blood runs in a long line, but he only wipes it with his shirt and continues working. The rain gets heavier, the soil becomes soft, and one pole of the trellis sinks. He has to dig each hole deeper again, press the soil down with his foot, and tie the wire tighter. He calls to ask about work. No one answers. The long tone continues in the rain. He turns the phone off, puts it into his pocket, and cuts the last piece of bamboo. The trellis is pushed by the wind several times. He holds it and adjusts every tie point. When the last pole stands firm, his shirt is completely wet, and his back is so tired that he straightens up very slowly. The gate opens. Tu Diem walks in and stops when she sees the tall and solid trellis. She looks down at his hand and sees the cut has dried. She looks at his face and sees the tiredness and the smile. The distance of a whole hard-working day is closed only by that look. She puts the load down more slowly than usual because her shoulders are numb. Rainwater from the small roof falls in steady drops onto the soil that has just been turned. Toan steps closer, his hand still covered with mud, but he keeps a distance so he will not stain her shirt. He asks if she is cold, his voice rough after working in the rain for so long. She shakes her head, looks around the garden, then looks at the trellis again, as if to make sure it is truly standing firm. In that moment, neither of them says anything more, but both understand that today has been held together. Tu Diem steps onto the porch, takes the dry towel hanging on the wall, and hands it to Toan. He wipes his hands first and then his face so the rainwater and mud will not fall onto the freshly swept floor. She bends down and looks at the cut on his hand. The blood has dried, but the skin is still slightly open. He says it only slipped when the bamboo was wet. She goes inside to get warm water and a clean cloth. He stands still while she washes the wound again, his eyes still looking toward the trellis as if checking whether any pole is leaning. The evening wind moves through the garden, carrying the smell of wet soil. The wires vibrate with a very small sound. Tu Diem wrings his wet shirt and hangs it on the line. He changes into a dry shirt and comes back out, while there is still some light in the yard, not leaving work unfinished. They walk along the vegetable beds. Toan presses the soil with his foot, where the rain has cut shallow lines so water will not stay at the roots. Tu Diem gathers the damaged leaves and puts them aside for the chickens later. No one mentions the low price at the market or the unanswered calls, but in the way they work faster and more neatly, it is clear they are both calculating for the coming rainy days. Toan takes the small hoe and walks one more round around the trellis to reopen the drainage lines that the soft soil has just filled. The rainwater follows the blade and runs out toward the path. He moves slowly because the ground is slippery, testing each step before putting his weight down. Tu Diem walks behind him with a small basket, picking up the extra wire and broken bamboo and placing them aside so no one will step on them in the dark the next morning. Their working rhythm naturally matches again, like in the morning on the hill path. A strong gust of wind lifts the tarpaulin at the corner of the porch. Toan runs over to tie another knot. Tu Diem holds the edge for him, the rain hitting her shoulder, but she does not move back. When it is finished, they stand still for a few seconds, looking over the garden. The vegetable rows are straighter, the water lines are clear, the trellis stands more firmly than in the afternoon. He picks up the flashlight from the ground, wipes the mud off, and hangs it back in its usual place. She brings the basket inside and empties the dry bamboo pieces near the stove for the next day's fire. Small tasks that would pile up in the morning. When they wash their hands again before dinner, the water in the basin is cloudy. Toan rinses first to let the dirt run off and only then puts his hands into the basin. Tu Diem pours clean water once more for the final wash. Both look at the stream of water flowing out into the yard, carrying the mud of a full working day. In the kitchen, the fire rises quickly because the firewood has been kept dry. The light from the flame makes the house warmer. Toan fixes the loose knife handle, wrapping it tighter with wire so he can continue the next day. The rice boils and the lid moves lightly. Tu Diem cuts the vegetables she saved from the morning, places his bowl in front of him, and tells him to eat while it is still hot. He serves her first and only then eats. Outside, the rain starts again. Toan takes the flashlight and goes out to check the trellis once more, even though it is already dark. The beam moves across each bamboo pole. Tu Diem stands in the porch watching until he comes back and says everything is still firm. Dinner moves slowly. They talk about digging the drainage deeper, tying the awning again, buying the watering can, cutting more bamboo for the fence. Only practical sentences. After eating, he washes the bowls. The well water is colder because of the long rain. He washes slowly so his hands will not slip. She wipes the table and arranges everything back in its place for the morning. They stand at the doorway looking out at the garden. The trellis stands still in the rain. The light from inside the house is enough to show its shape. A piece of work completed in a heavy day. Tu Diem gives him a cup of ginger water. He drinks a long mouthful and gives it back to her. She takes a small sip. Sharing one cup has become a habit from the days when they had very little. They sit down when the rain becomes lighter. Only the small fire remains. Toan rubs his back and breathes out slowly as the fatigue appears. Tu Diem looks at his hand and then at her own, still marked from the hot water in the morning. She says that if it keeps raining tomorrow, they will have to cover the trellis and dig the drainage deeper. He nods and calculates the remaining bamboo and the amount of wire they still need to buy. Both are preparing for the next day. Night becomes deeper. They close the door early to keep the warmth. Toan checks the roof one more time. Tu Diem hangs the clothes near the stove so they will dry faster. The sound of the rain becomes lighter. Before turning off the light, they look at each other longer than on other nights. The trellis outside, the stacked firewood, the finished meal, the cleaned wound, all of it is the answer. Tomorrow there is still much to do, but inside this small house, the rhythm of their life has been kept.
Sau buổi chạy sáng trên con dốc trơn ướt, Toàn và Từ Diễm trở về với nhịp sống quen thuộc nhưng đầy áp lực của những ngày mưa. Từ Diễm bán rau giữa lúc chợ vắng, giá thấp vẫn cố mang tiền về nhà. Trong khi Toàn một mình dựng dàn bầu dưới mưa, trượt tay đến chảy máu nhưng không dừng lại. Buổi chiều, họ cùng khơi rãnh thoát nước, buộc lại mái hiên, làm từng việc nhỏ để giữ khu vườn không bị ngập. Bữa cơm tối diễn ra chậm và ấm, những câu nói đều xoay quanh công việc ngày mai. Đêm xuống, gian bầu đứng vững ngoài mưa, bó củi đã xếp gọn, vết thương đã được rửa sạch. Một ngày vất vả khép lại, để lại sự yên tâm rằng họ vẫn đang cùng nhau giữ lấy cuộc sống này.